Yeah, very good afternoon to all. A very good afternoon to all. On behalf of Amity Innovation Incubator, Amity University Gurugram, I extend a very warm welcome to our esteemed speaker, Mr. Sambhav Mehrotra, and all participants to this session of Ease of Doing Business. Amity Innovation Incubator, Gurugram, is located in Amity University, Gurugram campus, which is in the close proximity of one of the largest industrial hubs of country, providing an ideal platform and a vibrant ecosystem for early stage entrepreneur and startup. With the great vision of our Honorable Founder President, Dr. Ashok K. Chauhan, and Chancellor Dr. Asim K. Chauhan, the Incubation Center is truly committed to build an environment and an ecosystem of research, innovation, and entrepreneurship by providing support in establishment and growth of technology-based startup companies. In the past few years of its establishment, the center has incubated more than 20 startups in the area of e-commerce, edtech, virtual conferencing, transport and supply chain, digital marketing, to name a few. Today's webinar topic is on ease of doing business. It's a very relevant, particularly with reference to new businesses, startups, and of course the existing businesses which is operating in the business environment. In very simple term, when we define ease of doing, it means that how far the overall environment of a country is conducive for doing the business. There are a number of aspect and parameter with reference to ease of doing business. For example, how long it takes to start a business, how long it takes to registering a property, what is the overall tax law structure, overall business regulations, etc. I would like to mention that World Bank every year release an index on ease of doing business, which consists of 190 countries. And I'm happy to share that India has been ranked 63 in 2020 compared to 77. So it has gained a position of 14 points compared to the last year because of the various economic reforms made by the government in the recent past. The index considered various parameters in order to measure the ease of doing business in a particular country. For example, enforcing contract, resolving insolvency, starting a business, registering a property, paying taxes, and trading across border. But one thing which is important in this regard is, however, the government was aiming to achieve a rank within 50, within first 50. And we are quite far off away from our other Asian counterpart. For example, Singapore is second, Hong Kong is third, Korea is fifth, Malaysia is at 12th position, China is at 31, and US was placed on 6th on the list. So still there are a lot of things which is required to do in order to make Indian business environment conducive for the entrepreneur. The present session, ease of doing business, is going to focus on two important aspects. The first one is incorporation and allied compliances by the business enterprises. The second one is limited liability partnership versus private company. And our speaker is also going to talk about the other important aspect pertaining to ease of doing business. Before I invite our speaker of the day, let me introduce him to the participant. Mr. Sambhav Mehrotra is a first attempt fellow member of Institute of Chartered Accountant of India and a commerce graduate from Ramjas College, Delhi University. He has extensively worked in the startup ecosystem. He is consultant and advisor member at Startup Movers Private Limited. He is also an early stage investor in few startups. Having experience of working around struggling and turnaround startups, the idea of Startup Mover was conceptualized in one of the best possible place for such a concept, 91 Springboard Co-working. Startup Mover specializes in setting up entities, their basic compliances, reporting policies, structure, which help them to sail through easily during the financial due diligence by the investor. Startup Mover is handling over 150 startups pan India, providing holistic services with in-house team of professionals as well as star network of associates, which include lawyers, CAs, MBA, and CS. So I welcome our speaker, Mr. Sambhav Mehrotra. Over to you, Mr. Sambhav.
Thank you, Dr. Madhukar. If you can just confirm if my voice is fine.
Yeah, your voice is perfectly fine.
Thanks for the introduction, and thank you, Amity, for giving us this opportunity to interact with the ecosystem to add value and take our learnings back. For paucity of time, just a few disclaimers so that we have the right expectation is the end. I am a general skeptical. I'm a skeptical journalist, not a specialist in the field. I look at the things holistically. So I'll be touching upon some high-level stuff, and if at all you have some queries which require a deep diving, we'll be more than willing to answer at the end of the session. We'll be touching upon incorporation, Startup India. We'll also be touching upon high-level stuff of investor agreements, and the last topic, which is my favorite, is how and why legal and finance should be considered as investment by co-founders and not an expense. So I'll just be sharing my screen. If you can just confirm. Perfect. So we'll be doing discussions around ease of doing business, and we'll focus. So ease of doing business in itself is a quite a macro level discussion. We can go on and on talking about it, but for the sake of restricting ourselves to incubation and startups, we'll just be talking about two main critical topics. Where as a millennial, we have seen a lot of developments happening, and we can vouch for what changes the governments, not just the current government, even from the UP era, how much of change has happened in terms of meeting the compliances and doing a company incorporations. Before we begin, I think I just want to touch upon why startups to me personally are so dear, and why I have been building a career in the last 10 years focused on the startup ecosystem. As evident from the screen, if you just drill down to how economies have shaped up in the last 50 years and their growth trajectory, you'll see a trend that the country is entering the demographic dividend. That is, when they have the least dependent population, they have grown the fastest in that era. So you take last 20 years, and if you map the China's economic growth rate from nowhere to coming face to face with US, that graph just went up like anything. Luckily, India is now entering in that stage. So from effective 2018, India will enjoy that demographic dividend for 37 years, where we'll have less number of dependent population, and we'll have more people in the age group of 25 to 40 who will have to propel this economy to reach to that $5 trillion target that we are talking about. So this is the opportunity. This is the time that we need to just blow the thrusters and take this country to next level. Just basically connecting the trend for the Startup India policy that this government launched in January 16. This is the trend line that you see from December 13 to say December 16, or I would say just take it till December 15. You'll not see the bar curve going above 10,000 in any of these line items. And as soon as the startup policy announced, the average number of incorporations shoot up. Yes, there is a trend that you see of decline, but if you go to the average, you'll realize that the number of company incorporations that have picked up after the Startup India policy is encouraging. And the next chart that you see shows that only, that from April 18 onwards, this data is a public data. It's available as a monthly bulletin on the MCA website, where all these trends and analysis is shown on how many companies are registered every month. And there is a deep dive analysis as well in terms of sectors. This data is coming from that bulletin report. And you'll see the encouraging effect that now we've gone to an average of 10,000. And the trend line was also encouraging until the January 28th, once the whole global ecosystem has entered into the COVID era. The good part here, which is not relevant on this slide, is we already started this reduction process. The number of incorporations have started going up. So it's just a matter of time when we go back to the levels. But is this level sufficient for us to propel our economy to the way we want? Absolutely, there is a lot of gap, and we foresee that gap getting covered by the startup ecosystem. The new companies that will come up. It's not going to be easy for the government to just keep on generating the jobs. It will have an important role to play. The startup ecosystem will have a very, very important role to play in job creation. And it is evident from the definition of the startup that the government has given in the act, where they are saying that you have to be a job creator in order to get the tag for being a startup. So we are in resurrection. It's just a matter of time just when we come back. And I strongly feel adversity leads to bigger opportunities. Companies like Uber, you take any good example of a unicorn, you go back and you will find majority of those got they got conceptualized in time of adversity, where the founders took the opportunity in that adversity and created those companies. Again, just going to high level stuff of, if when we talk about incorporations or coming into existence, one of the questions that co-founder comes up, or a budding entrepreneur comes up with, is what should I open? Should I go directly to a private limited entity? Should I open a limited liability? Should I just open a partnership firm? So there are a lot of factors that define this, right? So it is a subjective question, I would say. Whenever a founder comes to me and asks me, I am not able to give a straightforward answer until he gives me 4 or 5 key elements. One of them is his conviction and his idea, his stage at which his idea stage has reached to what extent. So it is just an idea on a piece of paper. There is no partner. There is also a scope of the idea failing. In that context, we advise people to just check the market with, say, a proprietorship, because there are not many stakeholders. Opening up a new entity will have its own level of compliances to be done, and then there is the risk of non-compliance, which is huge. So it's okay to start off small. It's okay to start off by testing the markets in a proprietorship. Proprietorship is nothing but just your individual capacity. Your own PAN card is used to file a proprietorship return. You just have a brand name. So my name is Sambhav Mehrotra, and Startup Movers can just be my brand name instead of a private limited company. That's the way I started it. You just test the waters. You get the market feedback. At least your risk is small, and chances of stepping back are quite easy. The exit is not that bad. And then once you have established a good data analysis, you know that the stage is now set, you have few more partners with you, you start exploring different options of partnership firm, LLPs, and company. A partnership firm is typically incorporated just with a partnership deed. It can be or it cannot be registered. Law does not ask you to compulsorily register it. But the drawback there is, if you have a partnership firm which is unregistered, in the eyes of the law, court will have a standard set of rules that they will follow to listen to any case. And there are a few other drawbacks of the partnership firm not being able to file cases if it is not registered in some other name. Another aspect of unregistered partnership firm is that even the terms between the partners, so me and my partner have agreed to the terms on a written agreement, but when it goes to the court, it might not hold good. And the liabilities of the partners in this case are unlimited. So if something goes wrong, your personal assets can be confiscated, attached, and the authorities can go to that level to basically recover the revenue losses which could have happened in this business scenario. So registration is though optional, but in case you are going for partnership firm, it is advised that you get it registered in that state. Then comes the concept of limited liability partnership, which came into India in only April 2009. And you will see the trend that the number of LLPs are not that great that you see in private limited companies. The problem here is, since it was new, India took its own time to adopt and understand the concept. Plus, there were some drawbacks in terms of the compliances, though were less than the private limited, but as compared to a partnership firm, you become more transparent to the authorities, the government authorities. I think in that case, the adoption of this methodology has been quite slow, and mostly the professional firms. So just like for an example, CA firms, CS firms, architects, or people who do not have to raise external fundings are those businesses that opt for a limited liability partnership. Because the biggest benefit that you have is, though you are in a partnership arrangement, your liability is restricted. Your personal assets will not be attached. Whatever, your business has a separate legal entity, and whatever goes wrong in a normal business scenario, the liability gets restricted to that liability partnership. The drawback here is if you want to raise a fund, we'll go to that details in the table later of how fundraising is difficult in limited liability partnership. And then we talk about company where you can have a one-person company or a private limited company. This is registered with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs again. And the best business model that is derived for a startup is from a private limited. We'll discuss that later. So if we do the comparison of the all the four of all the four entity types, all four of them are covered by different statutes. Partnership is governed by Partnership Act, LLP under LLP Act, but it is governed. The filings and compliance are governed by ROC, and OPC, private limited company, are governed by Companies Act. Again, the compliances are covered by Registrar of Companies. The main documents that you are required to have to get the company or the entity in form. Partnership comes into existence only with the execution of a partnership agreement. It can be just on a 100-200 rupees stamp paper. It need not be registered. You just get it notarized, you apply for PAN, and you have your partnership firm ready. You start your business from 2 days, within 2 days. LLP again has a partnership agreement, but the incorporation process involved is a bit lengthy as compared to proprietorship or partnership, because the documents need to be filed to the ROC for being recognized. Similarly, for OPC and private limited company, there are various set of documents that need to be filed to bring you into existence. So partnership is the easiest form to bring you into existence as compared to the other three. However, in terms of liabilities, partnership has unlimited liability and other three has that benefit. Now, in partnership, you will need to have a minimum number of 2 partners to start off with, no limits. In LLP, again, 2 partners. In one-person company, the idea and the concept here was brought into picture when Companies Act 2013 was notified, which was a new act because our Companies Act dated back to 1956. There were a lot of changes and a new Companies Act was notified in 2013, which brought this idea of one-person company, which is in case of partnership, we solved for liabilities through an LLP. But like I'm a proprietor and I want my liabilities to be restricted, I didn't have any entity instrument to choose. And hence the one-person company concept came in, where me as one person can open a company as of sorts, which is a separate legal entity. I will have all the shareholding and all the ownership, but it is separate from my own personal existence. So it has a separate legal entity. So only one person is required to open a company. As soon as you want to add more partners, it will change to either a private limited company or an LLP, or you'll have to basically choose a partnership structure and close that down. Similarly, for private limited companies, you will need at least 2 directors and at least 2 shareholders or promoters. So it need not be necessary that the promoters and directors are the same during incorporation. You will need minimum 2 promoters and 2 distinct directors to start off with. Now, the easy part with partnerships LLP is that there is no requirement of a board meeting, which is where the compliances start getting restricted. Less number of compliances in partnership and LLP. But in case of OPC and private limited entities, you will need to hold at least 2 board meetings in an year and create the records for the same. Similarly, for shareholders meetings, so board meetings are being done by directors. At the shareholder meeting, you will need to have all the shareholders be a part of that. Since there are no shareholders in LLPs and partnership firm, there is no such requirement. Similarly, for OPC, there is just one ownership. One person holds 100% shares, no requirement for shareholders meeting. But for a private limited company where there are more than 2 shareholders, one shareholder, you will always need to have at least one shareholders meeting, which is the annual general meeting. Compulsorily, which is the add-on compliance for private limited companies. Now, this is the part where we've discussed why private limited companies are best in terms of startups who are raising investments. In partnership, there is no possibility of raising external investment. You can only raise debts or you can raise money from the partners, but you cannot have an external owner coming into the partnership firm and he's an equity holder. That possibility is not there in a partnership. You can only introduce a partner in a partnership firm. Similarly, in case of LLP, the investments are allowed. But again, the drawback here is once you want to take this company into an exit mode, or you are planning for an IPO, which is initial public offering. So you've run the company for 6 years and now you potentially see an exit through an acquisition or an IPO. LLP is not the route to be taken on that front. You'll have to convert that into a private limited. So to bypass all that, our recommendation to startups is always to go for private limited entities whenever they are wanting to or willing to raise funds, specifically from foreign investors. Because in case of foreign investments in LLP, which is the next point, you will have to take an approval from the authorities. But in private limited company, you have an option to get and raise the foreign investments in automatic route, where you just have to do an intimation. So you don't have to wait for the approval. There are certain sectors where you can raise foreign investment and just intimate the government that I have raised the funds, which is allowed only in private limited entities. In LLP, you will have to take an approval route. Again, there are, as I said, the benefit of LLP is less number of compliance. There, if you see the half yearly compliance, there is MSME disclosure. MSME disclosure is just one of the requirements. There are now 4 or 5 different requirements that have come in the last 2-3 years for the point of transparency, which the government has brought in, which is not required in the case of LLP, but that would be required in the case of OPC and private limited company. And just lastly, the annual compliance in a partnership firm, the only thing you need to do is file your income tax return. That's it. There is no other compliance that you need to do. Your other compliance are vis-a-vis to other 3 entity types, LLP, OPC, private limited. But when it comes to LLP, not only you have to file the ITR, which is to the income tax department, you also have to file your financials and the annual return, which is the movement on the capital of the partners to the ROC, which are 2 forms that are filed at the end of the year. And then you also have to do what is called as DIN KYC. DIN stands for Director Identification Number. So for incorporating any 3 entity, one out of these 3 entities, a DIN is mandatory. And now what government has said is every year they are doing the KYC to have a transparency and weed out any fraudulent activities that are happening in the system. And this is again an annual compliance to be done. Similar for OPC, you will have to file the income tax returns, financials, and annual return, DIN KYC, and if you see there is another form that got added, which is DPT3. This is not exhaustive. The compliances in OPC and private limited are much more than you see in this slide. And hence, in the decision-making process, if you have to summarize in 2-3 lines, if you want to build a business in which you don't expect any external investment to be raised, it's going to be closely held, only family members, and you have the funds to manage it, LLP is the best route because you don't have that much compliances in place. But if you want to have more equity investment coming in, raise funds, plan an exit, then you should go for private limited entities, specifically in case of startup entities. As I said, in this presentation, we'll just be touching upon ease of business that has happened in the company incorporation side in the last 10 years or so. We are a generation that has witnessed standing outside the ROC offices with the hard copy of the papers, submitting in, taking a receipt, and then doing 4 or 5 follow-ups by going to the departments for getting the company incorporation, and used to take 1.5 to 2 months. And to the time which we currently stand, we get a client in the morning who luckily has all the prerequisites with him, and the company gets incorporated the next day. That's where we've reached. It's come down from 2 months to 2-3 days itself. So that's how easy it has become. So people who are trying it in the new framework might face some challenge, and they say so much for doing ease of business. But if you see the whole history of 10 years and how things have unfolded, then you will be able to grasp it better, that how much easy it has become for getting incorporated in India and starting a business. Yes, we are far off from countries like Singapore or any developed nations where it's still a one-day exercise. But we've made a decent progress in the last 10 years when we talk about the incorporation bit of it. So for company registration, these are the basic requirements. You will need to have at least 2 promoters, 2 individuals to start off the company. The first thing which you'll need to do is get your DSC made. It's called Digital Signature Certificate. It's a USB which holds the software which is tagged to your PAN card as an identity, and it's used in place of your signatures in various documents through a software. Then you need to have a registered office in place, whose documentation should be perfect. The ownership should be identified, and there should be a utility bill. Then there are IDs and declarations by the promoters to be given. Then the first and the foremost, I would say, is you should have a name which should be legally recognized, and it should not fall out of the ambit of allowed provisions of the Companies Act. Things have eased out here as well, where there is an open real-time system to check on the data points. Unfortunately, even if you check through those online systems, when you apply the name, there are certain hidden criteria which only get highlighted when the officials are checking it, and there are rejections. So for an example, if you search for a name and it's in the ROC framework, it's available. You apply for that, but when the official checks it, they also do a double level check of whether it's a registered trademark or is there any other existing company in a similar name structure. There is still a chance of rejection at the official end. So the online search is not the only criteria that if you searched online, the name is available, you will get it. That's just first step. There is still a possibility of rejection by the official, which we'll discuss shortly, how ROC has simplified that process as well. And then lastly, a business object. What is your main activity of the company, right? In a corporate structure, your main object cannot change so frequently, and if it changes, you have to inform it to the government. So if I want to do I want to do an ed tech company, education technology, I cannot start working in a finance domain without changing my main object. So my main object, which is a part of my memorandum, should always reflect the business that I want to get into. Just a run through of what all is covered, what are the steps which are common, which has been common across the last 10 years. Just the methods of for filling the forms have changed. The first step, you prepare a DSC, which is without which you cannot file a form. Second is you reserve a name. It now takes a minimum of 1 day. We have seen a time where we, initial days when we started off Startup Movers, we lost certain of our, I would say, premium startups, which are now some who's who of the ecosystem, because the name itself took about a month to come in, which we didn't have a control. And we faced the hardships of that, being a professional where you're not in control of the things. And then also it comes back to you, your work style. And now we are confident in telling our clients or potential startups, entrepreneurs, that the things have eased out and the maximum it takes is 2 to 3 working days. Usually it comes the next working day itself. Then there are other set of documents that are prepared. Once you have the name, you choose that name and you start preparing your other documents. Along with the documents, you file all the requisite forms to the company into the ROC. It now usually takes an average of 3 days, but as I said, it's subjective, and in some case it can go up to 7 to 10 days. And there are those one-off cases where there are discrepancies, or some subjective cases where you'll have to go back to the officer with a written representation. Yes, only online, and it could take about a month, but an average 3 days is what it takes. Then once your company is incorporated, you get a certificate of incorporation. Once you have the certificate of incorporation, a new compliance that have come in the last few years, which is through the New Companies Act, is the commencement of business, which earlier was not there in the old Companies Act, where when you have started the company, you have to inform the government that we have now commenced the business as well. So what has happened in the historical scenario was there was a lot of shell companies being created, a lot of fraudulent activities being done. So if you look at the data point, almost 60% of the companies with ROC at one point of time were inactive. And there were steps that have been taken by the ROC to weed them out, where they have been removed suo moto by the registrar of companies. And there are 4 or 5 compliances that have been introduced. So for an example, one of the compliance that was introduced was doing your registered office KYC. So everybody was supposed to stand in front of their offices, do a geotagging of a picture, upload that to the government, and get that compliance done. And the companies that have not done that have been removed, because a big chunk of it came out as dummy companies. So in order to, this is also one of those steps where the government wants to actually see whether the business started or not. And hence, when you have opened your bank account and you have put money into the company, you'll have to file a declaration where you are saying that you have officially now commenced the business as well. Now, private limited, there are other registrations also that you will be required to do. Once you're, so this is one area which has seen a whole lot of improvement in the last 10 years when we talk about ease of doing business. So as a client, when we used to get companies, there were 5 or 6 different departments which we had to run to get the registration done. 5 or 6 different vendors who would be liaising with the department to get this done. And it used to take a considerable period of time to have all the registrations in place and start working. So like GST registration is required whenever you cross a threshold limit. Import export code is required if you are into the business of importing or exporting. You cannot do it without the IC code. If you are into, say, a food or a allied industry, you will definitely need to have a FSSAI registration. And if your number of employees are crossing 20 or 10, you will need the PF and ESI registration. If you're in Maharashtra, you will need a professional tax registration. And if, according to different states, there were different registrations that are required for bringing your company into operations and ensure that it is compliant. Now, what has improved in the last 10 years, we'll go through that, because that's the interesting part to see. So we started off when this on. I'm not going back to the documentary era when we used to go to the ROC, stand in line and submit the document. We started off with the electronic forms, where INC 7 was the first one that was introduced, in which 5 different forms were filed together. But the documentation that you were preparing, just like memorandum, articles, declarations, all those were printed, signed, and then scanned and attached to the forms, and then applied. At this era, the only thing that got eased out was you don't have to go to the department physically to get the things done. Everything was online. The registration part, at least, was shifted to being online. The drawback here was, even in this case, the PAN and TAN, the PAN number you are in need of for your income tax registration, and the TAN number that you see is for deducting the TDS. So for the paucity of time, I'm not going and deep diving into the two. These are just 2 registrations that you needed, income tax registration, which were applied after you got a certificate of incorporation. And this again used to take about 10-12 days. So you can imagine, you cannot open a bank account till you have PAN numbers. You have to wait for 12 days for your PAN to come. This is when there was INC 7. Then there were further improvements, and government introduced INC 29, in which it was an integrated incorporation forms. So the best part what happened here was, if you see, it says the director identification number was given along with the form, because initially in INC 7 you had to apply a DIN number separately. Now what government said is, you don't apply that separately, you give in that form itself. That saved another 2-3 days. Again, they said you don't need to apply name approval separately. You put it in the form. If you think your name is matching to the requirements, we'll give it to you in one go. So a lot of these compliances, which were in sections or milestones, were combined, and in one application you were able to get multiple things. Even the PAN TAN was integrated, but the disadvantage that comes with this was that if you choose a name which is not approved by the ROC, then all your documentations will have to change. So I'm the ROC, I will send your form back and say, choose a different name and file the form again. Everything that you would have created, memorandum, article, declaration, all that will change, and you'll have to get the signing done again. So this became a disadvantage of this form, and hence people relied on the earlier aspect, where at least they were reserving the name separately through INC 1, and then they were creating the rest of the forms. And then I would say this was a game changer, where the government introduced what we call as RUN, reserve unique name. Now what happened, ROC is giving you option to reserve a name for a period of 20 days. And even if you do not have a digital signature, you can at least apply the name and get it reserved for 20 days and do your site compliances accordingly. So as I said, there is no requirement of DSC. You can apply 2 names. There is one resubmission also allowed. So even if both the names get rejected, in the same form, government will allow you to give 2 more names. Whatever name you get will be reserved for 20 days. Nobody else will be able to take it. The fees is only 1,000 rupees. And then there is no need to feed the detail of director. So you need not have all the directors ready at that time. You can just reserve the name. And the proposed company can also apply the name directly in SPICE form. We'll come to that, which was the next development that happened. But it's important to note here that RUN is now a pretty unique, I would say, unique service that ROC is giving, where you yourself can go and create an account and reserve any name you want. However, the right approach here is, because professionals already have an account for themselves, usually the professionals will apply it on your behalf. And when that name is reserved, while filling up the form, they'll use the reference and use the approved name when they are filling up the other forms. Then comes the SPICE INC 32 form, which it became a simplified performer for incorporating company electronically. In this, the best part was, even the hard copy of the document that was being prepared, the multi-page memorandum, articles, they were also digitized. and you were asked to just digitally sign them instead of printing them, signing them, scanning them, attaching them. Nothing of that is needed. Fill the online form, put your digital signatures, and you're done. So you see how the trend has changed across the 10 years, where government has brought digitization and automation and all steps that they have been doing. And in INC 32, you have to fill up the SPICE form, which is INC 32. And then if you see the memorandum article were also digitized, no hard copies. They were filed together and you'll have your company incorporated. Along with this, government introduced the agile form. As I said, now everything is getting integrated. The first thing that they integrated was goods and service tax along with ESI and PF. So these three registrations that you were supposed to take separately after your company got incorporated, now government has said you apply it along with the INC 32 form, we'll give it to you, which were optional at that point of time. Again, the drawback here was once this scheme was launched, people applied through agile form. They did not get the GST number within the stipulated time when they were supposed to start the business. And hence they had to apply another number to start the business. And over a period of time, they got a duplicate number which was to be surrendered. Now things have eased out. These were initial hiccups. But now when you apply the company, there's another development. We have come up with a Spice Plus form, which is now 10 services by 3 central government ministries, one state government, Department of Revenue, all of that has integrated. And not only you get the company, you get the PAN, TAN, GSTN, PF, PSI, even the bank account number is generated when your company is incorporated. If you are in the state where professional tax is applicable, you will even get the professional tax registration. So it is like government ने हमारे पेट पे लात मारी, but it is okay. We take it as a advantage for the company, and we encourage such steps to be taken. And the best part here is the 2-month timeline is now down to 4 to 5 average days. So if you have all the prerequisite documents ready, it hardly takes about 7 to 10 days on the max to incorporate the company. The other form that needs to be filed along with SPICE, again, Agile, which was the initial form for applying GST, PF, and ESI. It has further been modified and it's called Agile Pro. Along with that, the AOA MOA form, which was a digital form, has also been modified. It's now called SPICE Plus AOA, SPICE Plus MOA. And another digitization that happened was this INC 9 form. It was a simple declaration given by the promoters and directors, which is also digitized now. So if you see, a lot of documentation work over a period of time has been digitized, and the use of digital signatures has been encouraged by the government to ease out on the things. Since the introduction of this form, the run surveys that we saw for reserving the names, because now in SPICE form, the part that you see is it's in 2 parts, part A and part B. Part A, you can file separately just for taking the name. So you need not do the run compliance, just fill the part A of the SPICE form, get the name and fill the part B. And if at all you now want to change the name of the company, then only you will use the run functionality, where you will apply for the name, get the approval, and then file the forms for changing the company name if it is required. Some other steps that government has taken specifically around the incorporation things. This is after the Companies Act 2013, and with the startup ecosystem developing. These are 4 of the biggest ease notification that the government came out with. The first one being, when you incorporate a private limited company, the government said that you need to have at least 1 lakh rupees of capital. Now I am a student, I have a great idea. I want to start a company. Government was asking me, "पहले 1 lakh रुपए लाओ, तब company start करो." What the realization was that the startup ecosystem, which are having an early stage young entrepreneurs, for asking them to put in 1 lakh of rupees for just the ideation stage of it, the government came up with the concept. They omitted it. So even if you want to start off a company with 10,000 rupees, you can now do that. So this 1 lakh limit was removed. They have also removed, common seal, which used to be a stamp. It was a steel stamp that we used to use. Even during my training period, I always used to wonder why that, why was that even required at the first instance. The only thing we enjoyed doing it was just enjoy the graving of that seal. And when the Companies Act 13 came in, the common seal requirement was also abolished. It was made optional. Was made just for identification, and government does not mandate that your company document should have a common seal. They also brought a transformational change in the company name reservation. So earlier, every state ROC department had the, uh, I would say, the authority or responsibility or the powers for this name reservation also. So you would, if you would go to that back to era, you'll see a lot of professionals going for a physical discussions to the offices, trying to get the name of their choice, moving on to the documentation, getting things done faster. But now things have centralized. It's the unit, as I'm aware of, I could be wrong, is in Manesar. It's a centralized, digitized unit whose role is only to, uh, out of this re-engineering process, manage all these online functionalities. And hence that physical interaction and going to the department has become zero, almost zero for private limited entities now. And MCA has also reduced the company incorporation fees to zero. So when I say incorporation fees, it's not that you don't have to incur any expense for getting a private limited incorporation. Only the incorporation fees, which in any case was non-material, immaterial at that time, has been abolished. But the stamp duty, which is on your authorized capital, that you still need to pay. So if you go to the second line, the best part, another best part that the ROC did was, during incorporation, if you have a 1 lakh capital or a 10 lakh capital, the stamp duty remains the same. There is no incorporation fees. So if you want to raise funds later, you can have a 10 lakh rupee authorized capital at the time of incorporation itself and save on the cost. Because if you want to increase this capital later on, then the government will ask for additional stamp duty. So that's another cost saving. But the drawback of why people don't choose it at the time of incorporation and they incorporate with the least possible paid up capital or authorized capital is, your other form filing fees is dependent on the authorized capital that you have. So if I start a company with 10 lakh fees, my ROC filing fees for different forms could go up from 100 to 500, which is not that material. But when you do a delayed filing, the penalty amount on that is 16x, 20x, 24x. So taking that parameter into consideration, where there could be adverse scenarios, late filings, or even timely filings, when you do a cost benefit analysis in terms of numbers, you will see you are saving some money at the year end when you are doing those annual filings. But if you take my personal opinion, if you're starting a startup, you are looking to raise funds, do give it a thought whether at the incorporation itself you want to keep a higher authorized capital or you want to increase it later. As I said in the initial slide of demographic dividend, on why startups will play a crucial role if you have to go to a 5 trillion economy. And I've stressed on the definition of startup by the TIPP, where it says employment generation. So you need to be a technologically a new invention startup, but you should also be an employment generating startup as well. And hence I would want to touch just a little bit. As I said, we'll just take 3-4 topics on the higher level and then we'll go into Q&As, which is the most exciting part for me. So Startup India policy was launched in January 16, where government recognized the startups, where they said private limited, a company, a partnership, or an LLP, and their company, a date of incorporation has not, they are within the 10 years from the date of incorporation. And the turnover has, so this initial turnover was 25, not, there have been notifications and they are taking that turnover up. So to increase the funnel, the turnover should not exceed 100 crores, and innovation, development, and improvement or high potential to generate employment should be there. Such entities can apply to now this is now DIPP, which initially used to be Department for Promotion of Industry and Trade. Apply to the organization and get a Startup India recognition, which will give you a lot of benefits in terms of compliances. These are the benefits which we'll just touch upon a high level yet again. So if you are a recognized startup, you will get a 50% deduction for applying patents and trademarks. Your patent application will be fast tracked. You can opt for a 3-year tax benefit. This will come back to in the last. You have a you have a opportunity of self-certifying yourself in 6 labor laws and 3 environmental laws, where they have abolished that there would not be an inspection by the respective department. You can take deposits. Convertible note is one of the instruments for raising funds, which can only be raised by recognized startups. It is not allowed for other companies which do not have a Startup India registration. You can only hold 2 board meetings. Government has fund of funds. In the first fund, the fund of funds was set for 10,000 crores, through which they gave to other funds for dispersing to startups. There is mobilization of funds. Barring this period of COVID, yes, there was some slowdown in funding, but there were funds available for startups. And then, as I said, convertible notes can be issued, which is a recent introduction in Indian ecosystem, highly prevalent in the Western and in Silicon Valley. This recognized startups, those who have got certificates, can issue convertible notes for raising funds from foreign investors. Now I'll come back to the point on tax benefits on startups. What happened initially was, as and when the startup ecosystem was on the rise, there was a problem in terms of income tax laws, where whenever a company was raising funds, the valuation aspect of the company was being challenged by the income tax department. So there was so that debate went on for long. There were a lot of representations that happened from a lot of associations, and then the government came out with a notification, and they gave an option for another registration. So once you are done with your Startup India registration, there is another registration form 2 to be filed, which gives you an angel tax exemption, where if you are a recognized startup, you will be out of that ambit of angel tax assessment and giving all that, getting into that assessment domain. So that got added as additional registration requirement. So I will get recognized with Startup India. I will file another form and I will seek an angel tax exemption. Two, these two are self-certified. There is no requirement of approval. You upload the form on the website, you get the recognition. But there is a third registration requirement which gives you this 3-year exemption, which is an application to the interministerial board of the government, where they evaluate the startup, and once they give this third certificate, which is the certificate under Section 80 IAC of the Income Tax Act, you are allowed as a startup to take 3 years exemption from paying tax on your profits to the government. So if I don't have the right number right now, so even if there are 30,000 or 35,000 registered startup with the government, the startups for 3-year exemption are in few hundreds right now, because this is one area where the government is being watchful, and the approvals from interministerial board do not come through in one go, like in the initial 2 registration processes. So Startup India registration process is 3-stage, as I said. One is straightforward, you register on the website, you get the first registration certificate, then you file the form 2, you get the angel tax certificate. These 2 are mandatory. I mean, every startup needs to do that. The third one is subjective. You can file the application, but it is dependent on the interministerial board, and it takes about 6 to 8 months to complete. So that was on Startup India, not going into deep diving into a lot of things. And then we'll go into one last topic, a second last topic on touching upon why legal and finance is important. I'll touch on the legal aspect of it. As a person in the startup ecosystem, I can talk a lot about failures. So I've seen a lot of failures in the last 10 years and few successes. But when we talk about those failures, we make sure that failures are being used by the ecosystem to convert more success. So one of the reasons for failures for startups was their lack of having concrete documentation in terms of certain agreements which were just verbal, whether it be amongst the founders, whether it be amongst the shareholders, whether it be among the employees. And startups actually take these decisions at a later stage in their life cycle, whereas the right stage to do it is when your risk is exposed. So I have a founder, now I'm going into fundraise. It is my not just my duty but responsibility as towards my other founders as well, to have everything in written so that there is no disagreement on certain paths, and you see your whole dreams and ideas getting shattered because of that. Similarly, on the investment side of it, I have an angel investor. I signed the term sheet, I took a template from the website and I just signed that and I'm done. Now I raise the next round, the other investor that's coming on board is raising a red flag. Oh, I don't agree with the previous investment terms. and then you go back and take legal opinions, and the time gets wasted. That time you might lose an opportunity to get an investor on board. Similar grounds, you get an employee on board, you offered him ESOP without an ESOP policy, and you got an ESOP policy 2 years later, and now the employee is not in the company. There are a lot of complexities that come out of due to lack of such legal agreements in being placed. My recommendation is always have your ears and eyes open, and whenever your risk gets exposed, have these legal agreements done. Which this is not an exhaustive list. Again, as I said, recommendatory. Have a founders agreement. If it's LLP or partnership, have it registered. If you're doing investment agreement, don't just use templates. Get a lawyer on board. When you're hiring an employee, again, don't just use templates. Do a deep level of research. Take mentor opinions. Get a consultant opinion, even if you can't hire an HR. But ensure you have covered yourself with the risk. And then finally, if you the most critical part of non-disclosures to be executed with all stakeholders are in the ecosystem to keep your risk covered. And then just touching upon the one of the most talked topic whenever you are raising funds on what are the clauses of investment agreements. As I said, if you have everything written in an agreement, things become smoother to be executed. Although in the eyes of the law, to be frank, these are piece of papers whenever there's a dispute, but having them at least helps you solve the matters amicably later. So the investment agreement talks about the dilution and the investment, what kind of equity is being issued, how much amount is being issued, what is the price of the security, whether the investor will have a director seat, which is the composition of the board. Whenever there is a new fundraise, there is a right of first refusal that will be given to existing investors. Then there are matters as investors on which I will want to take decisions and I don't want to leave it to the founders. So for an example, I don't want founder to incur expense over 5 lakh rupees without my knowledge. I'll add it in the reserve matter. Then the investment agreement talks about condition, precedent, and subsequent. Precedent here means all those things that you will have to complete before investor gives you money. And subsequent means all those things you have to complete once investor gives you money, and you have to give a certificate to the investor that I have met with both. Similarly, there is lock-in investing. Your investor might want to lock in your founders for 3 years, or they'll want to vest additional shares for 4 years. Tag along, drag along, right? Where if I am selling my shares as founders, I can drag the investors can drag the founders when they're selling their shares. How and in what manner will I get an exit as an investor? NDA, as I said, non-disclosure is a standard literature to be present. Who holds the IP? How will the IP be managed? And then there comes the anti-dilution clause that in case you are raising more funds, how can I still not be diluted? So these are just broader high-level terms, just to highlight that there is a lot to legal and finance when you talk about the scope that's involved in this side of the story. And which takes me to my last discussion point on whether should co-founder consider the finance and legal as expense, or is that an investment? So that's as an entrepreneur, I am trying to build that. I'm trying to change that condition mindset of whenever I go for a tech co-founder, that search is extensive. I call that CTO, give equity, give everything, and my whole company depends on that CTO, and that's how we foresee a CTO search. But when we talk about legal and finance, that comes in the lowest end of the bucket. Maybe not lowest, it's not at that priority. And hence, we at times think of whenever we start searching for the scope, go talking to consultants, analyzing how much we have to spend on it. That to our conditioned mind as an entrepreneur is an expense. We don't consider that as investment, that by doing that compliance, by taking that opinion, by getting certain person on board for mentorship, there could be a ROI of much higher percentage as compared to other investment decisions that have been taken in the early stage startups on whether finance and legal should be considered as an investment, or should I still be considering it expense and be the least spending the least on it in my initial days. So I'll finish off at this stage. And I will go on to questions because we are almost on time.
Yes.
Dr.
Yeah. Yeah, Sahil is with me. He will help you out with this questionnaires. So anyone asking for question, they can raise the hand or they can type in the chat box. I think we have already received a couple of questions there in the chat box. Sahil, you can help.
So we have a question from Santosh Bhupala. I have a private limited company and an investor who is interested to invest holds US passport with OCI card. Can he invest in my company?
Of course, he can invest in your company, and you have both the options for him. Apparently, it seems he is a foreign citizen, so this will come through an FDI route, foreign direct investment, and there are certain compliances which are tagged to it. So it will not be a straightforward transaction where he just puts money into the company and that's done. Apart from the company law compliances, you'll also have to adhere to certain FDI compliances where you have to report this transaction to RBI. So yes, to summarize your answer, he can invest in your company, but as a founder, you need to do one level of extra compliances.
We have a question from Gagan Gupta. Gagan, if you could raise your hand, I'll unmute you to ask your question. I have unmuted you, Gagan.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So basically, I have this question. Basically, I do not want a DIY on my side because I want to focus myself on the exact root cause of the business, the problem statements, and the solution. And I want to drive. I want to be at the seat where I'm driving my business to its max potential and solving as many uh, problems as possible. So I am not looking for a DIY. DIY means I do not want to end up to myself doing the jobs which is not part of my business. For example, all the complexities which are back end of this finances and everything. So I am imagining a product. I am imagining a SaaS product or an app on my system which I open up, and it asks me all the questions, all the relevant questions about the company, about the motto and everything, whatever you have shown in the slide. So I fill up that form, I fill up that app with that information, and it gives me possible solutions and it gives me the template of the solution which I should go for. And I pay up a fees to this app or this SaaS product and I am done with the complexity.
Sure. What is the question here, Gagan?
So my question is, can you tell me a product or a service where I do not need to understand the complexity behind all this, where I
Yeah.
give all my inputs? For example, you ask me all the questions as a person if you're giving a service,
Mm-hmm.
or on the website in a forum if you are giving me this as a product.
Mm-hmm.
And I fill up all those questions with my answers, and then at the end of the slide, you give me the template, Gagan. This is the right template as per the taxes, exemptions, the format, the kind of company, these are the things you have to do and everything. So I do not want to understand the every theory behind it. I just want a product or a service which can simplify it for me and just give me the right solution, the right thing which I should follow.
Perfect. You've given me an idea here, Gagan, because so far there's nothing available as far as I'm aware of, because
I know.
it's quite subjective. So we started building this for which we will just launch a form, similar form for income tax filing in another week or so, where we are
Exactly.
doing this, where we are asking questions, and at the end of it, it gives you a which form you have to file. But when we were building that product, we realized there is so much subjectivity in that questionnaire itself. And when the user will start filling it up, we do expect him to, even after filling up the form, realize that he might have missed on to something. So I'm just saying that building this service or building this product would be fairly simple, but since it involves a lot of subjectivity, I would still recommend this has to be a one-on-one conversation with somebody in the industry who's gone through
I
that
agree.
cycle. Yeah. So
I
building
agree.
that product, yes, I agree, we can build it. Will it be 100% successful? I foresee that there are challenges of subjectivity.
Yeah, I mean challenges are everywhere. That's why I want to remove as much subjectivity as much possible, and I want to measure everything. That's the kind of background I'm coming from the measurements part. I want to evaluate people on the performances and everything based upon some parameters so that I can measure what exactly he have done. So that's what the kind of background I'm coming from. So obviously I do not want to fall into any subjectivity. The person who, if he is a consultant, he will give me 3 to 4 solutions. Okay, Gagan, these are the 3 to 4 solutions. Have a look and ask me any further question if you have any doubt. and we will go with one format and we end up the whole call. Otherwise, if he give me a product where product itself can show me these are the 3-4 solutions. Imagine the cleartax.in. The cleartax have simplified the ITR and every process to the end user. Nobody have to now anymore understand the complexity behind income tax filing in Indian government, right? Otherwise, everybody have to do the homework of how the income tax and ITR is getting filed up. So that's the problem we are giving. We are giving the complexity to the end user. The right point should be we should keep the complexity at ourselves and we should give a simplified process to the end user. That's how we will measure the success.
Perfect, Kagan. You've given me an idea. I think we'll have it on our website in a month's time. Thank you. I think we will have to work on the workflow, but it's fairly possible. We'll do it in a month's time.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Kagan. Thank you so much for the feedback.
So in the interest of time, we'll just be taking a couple of more questions. We have a question from Santosh Vupala. Do you recommend registering with Startup India within first year of incorporation?
Of course, you register within the first day itself. There is no barrier to it. You can register it as soon as you have your certificate of incorporation and commencement. Because as I said, it's 3-stage process. Your registration is lifetime, right? You get it and it's not expiring. So the first registration, which is just recognition of you being startup, can be applied in the first month itself, and also the angel tax exemption. Regarding the third exemption, which is on the taxation side, that also gives you a flexibility of choosing any 3 years in the next 10. So you don't have to wait for any years or timelines. You can apply it as soon as you get the framework done, as soon as you're incorporated.
Sambhav, I have a question here. See, a lot of students comes to us to the incubator stating while incorporating a private limited firm, they say that what address should they incorporate? Like, how should they go about on the address part? Like,
yeah.
So, what should be the?
So this is how I typically solved it in when I entered the co-working industry. So we started off from 91 Springboard, and the opportunity that I saw there was there are a lot of entrepreneurs that do not have a space of their own, and then they face challenges with registered office. So these co-working spaces came out with the idea of providing the registered office in their co-working spaces itself. So similar thing I think say incubators can support these companies where we can figure out the documentation part separately, but maybe these students can choose the incubator itself as a registered office address if it is allowed. And if not, they can basically opt for these co-working locations that are giving these virtual office plans specifically for registered office spaces. Of course, that comes at a cost, but these are the two possible options that we see. And yes, the third one is a traditional option of we having some family friends in the same state, city or the state, and temporarily we having at their address, and then over a period of time, whenever we have a corporate office, we're shifting it to that place. The only problem that I see here is, I'll just take a minute more. I say, supposing Amity, I am your incubator and I'm sitting out of Noida, but originally I belong to say a state of Karnataka. I'm from Bangalore. Now I'm getting incubated for 6 months in your incubation center, and I incorporate the company in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Now I'm shifting to Bangalore when I have grown in size. I have to shift that registered office from Uttar Pradesh to Karnataka, and shifting this registered office from one state to another is a painful exercise in terms of compliance. So your registered office should be in the state where you'll have a long-term fixed place of establishment. That's one. And second, if you do not have an address, leverage incubators and co-working spaces for registered office space.
So we have another question from Thiga Ranjan Ramanathan. Is there 2 parts in startup registration so that I can get DPPI number? I think he means DIPP.
Yeah. So this number I think you get in the first registration itself. So the first state of registration you apply. There are certain set of questions, and then there is a deck that you have to give. You basically, when you apply it, the first registration that comes up gives you the number, the registration number. And the secondary step is add-on step. So you recognize as a startup. Secondary step is the angel tax exemption. That's form 2 that needs to be filed, but you in any case will have a number before that itself. So it's not that you get the number after the second step. Your first step gives you the recognition number, and then the subsequent steps follow.
answer that question. And for further questions, everybody can write to us at info@ai.amity. We'll try to resolve. I mentioned the email ID in the chat.
I've just shared my screen just for the purpose of communication. So in any case, if anybody wants to have any query resolved, feel free to get back to us on this number or the email, or you can go back to the Amity incubation also. We'll touch base with them.
Sure. Sambhav, I think it was a great session altogether, addressing the young students, faculty members, and startups across India who are part of it. I'm sure they would have got a glimpse of how the ease of business in India has, in last few years, been good for the startup side of